Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here. Welcome, everyone who's watching at home. Welcome, Pierre. Welcome, Alex. Welcome, Ben. I apologize for the few minutes delay. There was some technology issues. As always, technology just making a victim of us all. I'm sure we've all had that before. I'm sure I'm not the only one here. But I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be hosting this webinar on the future of vertical farming and what's next on the plate. That plan, we have to attribute it to our marketing team. Gonna be honest, I would not have come with it myself. Let me introduce you really quickly to myself and why I'm posting this, and then I will let you all know who our speakers are and who everyone here is and what we're going to be discussing today. My name is Garazi. I am one of the associates here at Zone 4 in Amsterdam. I am a self-proclaimed vertical farming fanatic. Nothing I've ever done has to do with vertical farming, but I decided I really like it and then I went for it. So huge fan, huge knowledge I also think on the market, which I think is quite interesting. And I also know these guys who are also fanatics, also huge knowledge on the market, and I think are going to have really cool insights for everyone watching, and maybe someone who isn't watching but will be later. So let me introduce you all to our speakers. We have Pierre Swaelus from Garazi. Pierre, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So Pierre, originally from Belgium, landed because of love in Switzerland, and somehow from the financial service industry to vertical farming. And I run the operations of Garazi, which is a Swiss-based vertical farming startups.
Thank you so much, Pierre. We also have Alex Hem from Aero Farms. He's the senior project manager based in Abu Dhabi, which will have a different sort of approach than the ones here in Europe. Hi, Alex.
Hi, thanks, Garazi. Yeah, so my name's Alex. I work at Aero Farms. I've been at Aero Farms for about 6 years. I started at Aero Farms at our headquarters in Newark, New Jersey, where we own and operate a commercial farm feeding people and cities up and down the East Coast. I worked there for several years in operations, and I have since March of 2021 been in Abu Dhabi. I'm a senior project manager, so I'm here to lead the construction and fit out and startup of our world's largest vertical farming focused, indoor farming focused research center in partnership with the Abu Dhabi government. Abu Dhabi is a desert, so about 85% of food, depending on who you ask, is imported. So there's a huge opportunity here for indoor farming to improve food security and local food production.
Thank you, Alex. Really happy to have you here. Really looking forward to all your inputs and everything you have to say. And last but certainly not least, we have Ben Pieterse, who's the co-founder at Glow Farms and has had a stellar career in vertical farming. Ben, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ben. I'm one of the co-founders of Glow Farms. I've been working in vertical farming for about 6 years now. Started back in university and traveled a lot to see what the vertical farming hype is all about. And during these travels, I found out that it's actually really promising. So I hope to tell you more about my opinions later on. But I've been working for Own Greens, which is a spin-off of Vitra Plus, in the Netherlands for 2.5 years before founding my own company, Glow Farms. That was about 2.5 years ago. We use a unique conveyor belt technology to grow plants in a moving system. That makes it really efficient. Unfortunately, like a little disclaimer, I'm not sure how long I will continue working at Glow Farms since I've had a disagreement with my co-founder, and I'm also here sort of on a personal basis, I would say. So not only as co-founder, but also as a market expert, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. And as always, everyone here, I mean, I guess even myself on some sort of level, are just people who have found vertical farming and fallen in love with it. I do want to do a bit of a short introduction to what vertical farming is, because while I do know a lot of people who work with me know what vertical farming is, just because, well, I won't shut up about it. I also know that there's probably a lot of people who aren't too sure about what it is. Vertical farming is essentially a system of growing plants vertically, which is, the name would tell you what it is exactly. It saves up a lot of space. It allows for plants to be grown in places that they might usually not be grown in. They're quite different things. The oldest probably vertical farm that one can think of is the Gardens of Babylon, which is just exemplifies exactly how long this idea has been around. And obviously in 2022, we have quite a few new technologies, and we have a lot more things to consider, like the current economies, energy, and the cost of running a vertical farm. We also have different approaches and different technologies that, while still growing plants vertically, would also mean different approaches to how those plants are grown. So the first question we want to tackle is the two different versions within vertical farming that exist to grow plants. One is hydroponics, and the other is aeroponics. Pierre from YesI here is an expert in hydroponics because that's what YesI uses. And Alex and Ben are more on the aeroponics side of things. So, of course, everyone has to understand what each entails. So, I guess who wants to go first and explain what their own way of vertical farming entails and why they chose it?
I can give it a go. If you wish.
Go ahead.
I started. All right. So I'm the only one in the panel that has a company using hydroponics. So I'm going to try to defend our choice of technology as best as possible. But first, maybe just wanted to acknowledge the incredible work that AeroFarms and the Netherlands have done in promoting this new type of agriculture. I think that without players like AeroFarms starting around 20 years ago, there wouldn't be as many companies in the space today. And certainly technology wouldn't have evolved in the way that it has. So now to the technology, why didn't we take aeroponics? I think because around the world, if I'm correct, around 70% of growers use hydroponics, primarily in greenhouses. It's a pretty advanced technology. YesI doesn't develop its own technology, so we wanted to capitalize on existing one and make sure that we always had the most cutting edge tech readily available. The hydroponics that we use basically means that the roots of the plants are constantly in water. We can, of course, regulate the flow of water and have some periods where there's no water at all in the growing benches. But generally speaking, the roots are always in this water nutrient solution where they get all the food they need to grow efficiently. I think that's quite a high level overview of the technology.
I think that's a good explanation so far. It's also important to know that this doesn't necessarily involve soil. There's vertical farms that have existed that have involved soil, but this particular one does not, which I'm sure for a lot of people watching is a shock. But Ben, you wanted, I think, to say something as well.
Yeah. So there's actually a really good reason that we decided to go with aeroponics instead of hydroponics. For us, it's actually that it really fits our system because it's a vertical system. So it's actually not shelved system, but it's vertical. And in that way, it's way easier to use aeroponics than you might use a dripping system, but aeroponics is the easiest way to grow plants in such an environment. But I also think it's a more efficient way and it's a more complicated way of growing plants on water. I think hydroponics is there's a lot of different basic versions of hydroponics. It can be complicated too, but I would say using aeroponics in the right way is actually it's pretty it's pretty hard. And but if you manage to do it in the right way, it definitely gives you more yield. There's also some research on this. So aeroponics usually increases your yield. And also, it means you can grow plants that don't like being in water all the time. So we've seen that, for example, spinach or similar plants, they don't like being too having wet roots, basically. And with aeroponics, it's much easier to control how much water they get, and you can basically grow, I would say, drier varieties, which is a big advantage too. So yeah, I see aeroponics as the more sophisticated method, I would say. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, Ben, I appreciate that. I'm sure that Pierre has some thoughts on that as well. But Alex, anything else you want to add about how aeroponics work, or any of the big downsides, or what the like big advantages could be?
Yeah, absolutely. And Pierre and Ben did a really good job of explaining some of the key points here, and pros and cons for both. So aeroponics, just to take a step back, aeroponics, the word aero comes from air. And the idea with aeroponics is that rather than keeping the roots suspended in water, they are suspended in the air. So using some type of medium or substrate for the plant to take hold in, and then the roots extending below that medium, and usually being close to some sort of nozzle, which sprays a mist of water and nutrients to fertigate. Fertigate meaning fertilize and irrigate the plants. So yeah, like both of these gentlemen said, aeroponics is a little bit trickier on average, I'd say, than some hydroponic systems. But I also want to sort of emphasize the point that not every aeroponic or hydroponic system is the same. These are broad stroke words. Some have qualities that are more similar to that are some systems that might both be called hydroponic are not that similar to each other, and there's a lot of different hydroponic techniques. From an AeroFarms' standpoint, we found that compared to the hydroponic systems we were testing, aeroponics used quite a bit less water, and both systems use less than conventional agriculture, but we found aeroponic to have additional water savings. Again, that depends on the type of hydroponic system that you're considering. We also found better oxygen levels in the root zone. So plants need a certain amount of oxygen in their roots, and aeroponics sort of solves that naturally, whereas some hydroponic systems might struggle or use aerators in their systems to provide that oxygen. So those are the reasons we chose. But to Ben's point about aeroponics being a little bit more complicated, one of the major problems that folks find when they use aeroponics is that the nozzles that spray this fertilizer often get clogged because they have to spray a very fine mist. They're not spraying just water, they're also spraying nutrients. And so clogging is a common problem that folks who explore aeroponics will find. I'm sure Ben's experienced it. So AeroFarm, yeah.
Actually, it's not that big of an issue, I would say, if you use the right nutrients and the right nozzle. But it takes a lot of experimenting in order to find the right way to use it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's part of the learning curve. That's well said. It's solvable, is the point, but it's something that we consider. We learned over time how to build the best nozzles, or make the best nozzles for our system, and how to care for those nozzles and prevent cloggage. And that's some of our intellectual property is around that. So point being that it's a little bit trickier to use, but it does have advantages. So that's what we use, and AeroFarms obviously believes in it because Aero is part of our name.
Yeah, I think you probably have the name that best describes the system that you guys use. Does anyone want to maybe throw people a bone and explain what aquaponics is? Because I don't know if that's a question people will have, but that's also a name that often comes up in vertical farming. And does anyone want to explain what that is?
I can give it a shot. But,
Sure, I believe in you.
I mean, I honestly think aquaponics is the less or the least promising technology that you could use, especially on a larger scale. I think it works on a smaller scale, but it basically means you use you try to create a cycle where the nutrients are basically are being circulated. So you have a fish tank and you have plants on the other side, and basically the waste of the plants is nutrients for the fish, and the waste of the fish is nutrients for the plants. But I think in practice, it's usually you always need to add nutrients, so it's not a fully closed cycle, and that's the big downside of aquaponics, I think. It's a more, I would say it's a more romanticized way of how circular farming could look like in the future, but it's, in my view at least, definitely not the way forward to do large scale farming in these type of setups. Yeah.
I think if I can quickly intervene,
Of course.
I do agree with Ben on the fact that it's hard to scale as a system, because basically you're managing two different business models at once. Managing farms indoors, plants indoors is already complicated enough, I think. But adding living animals to it, or at least for us in Switzerland, where labor costs are really high, just makes your OPEX costs skyrocket. But there is one of our attendees, Mustafa, that make a very interesting comment about the treatment of wastewater from fisheries, which is something that we're currently working on, or at least testing the feasibility of it here in Switzerland. There are a lot of fisheries. They just discard their sludge into the environment, or it goes to a waste plant. What we would like to do in the future is to use that water or the sludge to then basically feed the plants with natural ingredients. So it's a disconnected aquaponic system. We're not there yet. I think it's also quite difficult to get it right, because you always have to fix the nutrient levels within the water. But down the line, this would dramatically reduce the input of nutrients within our system. So keeping that circularity in mind, it's something that we're not the only players looking into it. And I think that that's a very interesting topic there.
That's a point that I actually wanted to hear. There's one question that comes to mind regarding this. In terms of like the different varieties that you guys all grow, maybe you can go through them quickly. But do you think that maybe different ways of vertical farming, and like maybe hydroponics suits better one certain kind of plant, and maybe aeroponics could be better for another? How do you see that sort of expanding the range of plants that are grown vertically?
So what we've tested, I can talk from our experience, is that certain herbs, we primarily grow herbs here in Switzerland. Reason being because it's a higher margin crop, and since we're still in the pilot phase, we're trying to prove the economics at least with these products until we can start exploring on different or alternative crops. Certain herbs grow well, like basil. Others, like coriander, absolutely not. So what we are developing within our system is a kind of dry ponics as much as we can. So something where the plants are only irrigated for a short period of time and then spend most of their time out of water. So perhaps in that case, I think aeroponics would be a more interesting solution to grow that crop. I don't know what your experience is with that, Alex, is. But another crop that grows pretty well is salads, any kind of leafy greens. They grow really well in hydroponics. Now, I think that down the line, we could technically grow any kind of crops in these systems. The question is, are they economically viable? And we're competing with traditional farmers and greenhouses who have much lower setup costs and operating costs. So there it's always a balance. Like, how do we prove our unique value with our products? How can we price a premium without being too greedy either? And how can we make it work economically so that we ensure that the space survives in the long run? But I think there's a lot of research going into the space, and whether it's done by universities or vertical farming players themselves, or even corporates, I think that in 100 years, the discussion we're going to have today are going to feel so outdated that
That's the goal, right? To go so far that in 10 years we think, oh, we're babies. That should be the goal. Alex, I think you had a point.
Yeah, I would agree with what Pierre is saying and echo it, and also just share with folks. So you'll typically see leafy greens and herbs being the main focus of indoor growers for the reason that they are relatively high price point items, and they're relatively low in terms of energy inputs, and they work pretty well in these types of systems. So people talk about, and we'll get to this, like what are the advantages and comparisons between indoor and conventional outdoor, but something that you're not going to see anytime soon is people growing potatoes in indoor forms. Leafy greens, microgreens, these things fetch a pretty nice price in the market, and they grow pretty quickly, and they're well suited to these technologies. So these are what you're seeing for the most part. There's also a lot of interest in another point in their favor is that they are relatively fragile. They don't transport as well as some heavier, denser crops. So one of the advantages of indoor farming being that you can do it very close to the point of consumption. You can bring a product to market quickly and reduce or extend shelf life on people's refrigerators. You're not losing as much shelf life in transit. But there is a lot of interest in other crops, certainly. Aeroforms, by virtue of being a pretty well-established and well-funded company, we've explored a lot of different crops. Something that we're really excited about is growing berries in our indoor systems. So we are doing a lot of research around strawberries, blueberries. We've grown hops indoors that have been used by brewers to make beer. And stevia is another point of interest. So there's a lot of exciting things to explore here, and it's all about finding the supply chain problems that are causing food manufacturers the biggest headaches, and seeing where you can lend indoor farming's advantages to those problems. That's what we're interested in doing, in addition to growing our leafy green business, which is sort of the bread and butter of Aeroforms.
Mm-hmm. Personally, as a Spaniard, I'm really excited about potentially getting strawberries from vertical farming, just because I like strawberries and I do not find ones that I like all year round. So that's one big advantage for me. I think, unless you guys want to say something else, I think we should move on to the next question we're going to discuss. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Great. Then one on the side of vertical farming, there's also been a lot of criticisms regarding the energy usage. Obviously, because vertical farming is indoor farming and it requires a lot of light and a lot of systems to be set up, the energy usage is quite inefficient. And if you ask, I think most people who know even just a little bit about it, they would agree that it is probably the biggest downside to the industry. So, particularly considering now that we're in an energy crisis, what do you guys think this will mean for the future of vertical farming? Do you think that we'll find a way of doing it with renewables? Do you think that the energy crisis will have a long-lasting impact in the industry? Do you think that it will promote maybe new technologies or more innovation? Or what's your stance on it?
For me, I don't think it's going to be this huge issue for the entire sector, to be honest. Although it's a big factor right now, like a lot of companies struggle with it, but I believe with renewable energy, there's a lot of opportunities. So, using a wind turbine to to provide your farm with green energy. That's definitely one option. And then I also think that a lot of competitors have the same issue. So where we're based in the Netherlands, we have a lot of greenhouses that are being shut down right now because of this energy crisis. And like, frankly, I think they have bigger problems than we do. So yeah, I would say every grower right now has these issues, maybe except for when you're an outdoor grower and the circumstances right now are perfect, but I don't think that's the case with climate change and everything.
Yeah, nothing's ever perfect.
No, so I think every grower has the same issue basically right now, and I don't think vertical farms have a bigger problem with this, to be honest, than other growers. And also, I believe it's going to be fixable in the future with LEDs getting more efficient and solar cells getting more efficient. So it's gonna fix itself, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm. There's I recently read an article that talked about using the sun to make another sun with vertical farming, which is, I think, is where a lot of the industry is going. What are your thoughts, Pierre, Alex? Do you agree with Ben? Do you think that maybe he's going in
Maybe
the
Yeah.
opposite
just
direction?
one little remark. There's only one issue that I can think of is that investors are more hesitant to invest right now because of this. That's the only real issue I see on the short term.
Yeah, I agree with Ben on multiple points. I think the other interesting thing when we talk about energy usage is the first thing is that we're not the only industry that uses real a lot of energy. What we have as well as an advantage is that we can also choose when we grow crops. So energy sometimes is just produced all the time by baseload energy providers, and we can adapt when we grow. If we want to grow at night, when Ben mentioned wind turbine, there's more wind, we could basically use that excess energy that would otherwise be just dumped elsewhere and generally not stored. Then efficiency also relates to how much more output can we give per square meter compared to traditional agriculture. The general benchmark is that in traditional farming, you'd grow 1 to 3 kilos of herbs per square meter. And in most systems, hydroponics, aeroponics, combine you between 25 and 35, sometimes even more kilograms per square meter per year. So there, the efficiency is much greater. You also use a lot less land, less water, as we mentioned before. You're closer to the consumer. So there's a lot of aspects that our technology can bring to the table that are quite interesting. And from that standpoint, I think we should also put that into the equation when we do a so-called life cycle analysis of the value of the product. But yeah, as Ben mentioned, the electricity crisis right now is touching every player. I'm going to be the exception here. We got quite lucky. We signed purchasing power agreement contracts, which are basically long-term contracts with energy providers at a fixed price. It was a little bit of a disadvantage when we launched because the prices are a bit higher. We also source 100% certified renewable electricity for our farms. So the prices were a bit higher, but sorry if I hurt you guys, but my prices haven't changed since the beginning of the war. So this is some kind of strategic choices that you can make if you want to set up your own farm or if you want to improve at least energy costs, monitoring and control in your farms.
Happy to hear you're doing great, Pierre.
On that front, yes, there are challenges in every startup.
And on your side, Alex, how are you guys sort of tackling this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. These guys made great points. For sure, indoor growing does use energy. Lights use energy. HVAC systems use energy. But like Pierre said, it's also about what you do with that energy and what sort of output you put out. The advances in LEDs and energy efficiency that have happened in the last 10, 15 years are significant and are game changers for indoor growing. And as technologies get better and better, and as growers get more and more efficient with their use of energy, we're just going to see indoor farms do better and better and produce food with fewer and fewer inputs. Pierre mentioned, life cycle analysis, a notoriously hard thing to do well. If you take a very holistic view of anything, there's a lot of moving parts, and it starts to get a little bit hard to do a great carbon accounting. There's issues like transportation, there's spoilage, there's efficient use of fertilizers. These are all things that you have to take into account when you look at it from a pure energy standpoint. As renewable energy, AeroFarms is for the most part on the grid. So we're a user like others. As the energy systems become more renewable, we'll be a part of it. We're always looking at opportunities to use solar to help power our farms, and it's sort of on a case-by-case basis as to where it makes sense for us from an economic perspective to pursue that. So yeah, I would say, don't let anyone pretend like indoor farms aren't using energy. Of course they are, but there's a lot of other environmental advantages that counteract the energy we use, and it's a very large question to really do like an apples to apples comparison about different types of agriculture. And there's a lot of variables that you have to decide for yourself how much each of those weighs. So yeah, that's all I'd add.
Thank you. Do you agree with Ben's that long term it's not really going to affect the industry itself, and that it might just affect investors, or do you think it will not affect at all in any way?
Yeah, long term, I hope to see a completely renewable power grid. In which case, I hope we've solved energy and people can get energy at affordable rates everywhere that isn't contributing to climate change. And I hope very much so that happens sooner rather than later. I think it needs to. So I think long term, yeah, I don't think it's going to be I hope it's not a forever issue. And then just an interesting point on that as well. I mean, one of the main values of indoor farming is that it is not so much a mitigant necessarily of climate change, but it's a response to climate change. So as we see climate change impact outdoor productivity, making some regions hotter or drier, as the case may be, it becomes harder and harder to produce food in those places. So indoor farming is a great way to address that and to ensure that we can produce food in those regions that might not otherwise be able to. And like I said before, Abu Dhabi's a prime example. We've been a desert for a very long time here, and we're growing leafy greens now. So it's also indoor farming is also a response to being able to grow places where the climate change has made it more difficult to grow outdoors.
Mm-hmm. I think that is probably one of the biggest advantages of vertical farming. As Pierre mentioned, most of the food waste, not most, but a big chunk of food waste has come from the transportation process. To sort of, bring in the growing to the people, I think is a good one. For those in the audience, by the way, again, leave your questions in the chat. We'll get to them at the end, as there will be a session, sort of a lot of time for Q&As. And, if in the meantime we answer your questions while we're chatting, well, then that's already better. But actually, well, does anyone have anything else to say? No? How efficient. But I actually think that Alex's point is quite a good gateway for the last question that we wanted to tackle, which was vertical farming versus traditional farming. How do you guys see these two coexisting in the future? What do you think each of their strong suits are, considering how new but not new, since it's been around since Babylon, vertical farming is, considering like the advantages of being able to grow whenever, whatever, whereas traditional farming obviously has more years, more varieties of plants. So what are your general thoughts on the coexistence of these two industries?
Who wants to go first?
I'll start. No, I think it all depends on the big question: how bad is climate change going to be? Are we still? I mean, if we're not able to produce outdoors anymore, or at least certain crops, then we'll have to find a way to deal with it. And I guess a greenhouse is a way for some crops, but I guess we're also going to have to use more vertical farms to feed all the people in the future. So it's very hard to say like a percentage, for example. But I really believe that we sort of need vertical farming in the future, and we're gonna need it more and more because it's going to be harder to grow outdoors, and we're going to have more people. And then again, I for now it depends on what crop you're growing. So we're not going to grow, as Alex said, potatoes anytime soon in a vertical farm.
With no soil.
No, yeah. So the same goes for, I guess, fruit trees or I don't know, like really big crops. But I do think the necessity will grow, and with that the innovation in vertical farming. So yeah.
And I agree. I agree with Ben. I think first of all, it depends on where you're thinking about putting your vertical farm. Where there is abundant availability of land, like in the UAE, for example, it makes sense to probably have a combination of vertical farms and greenhouses. You can't grow anything in traditional agriculture for anywhere. In Switzerland, there's only 30% of the land that is arable, and it's heavily urbanized. So there is really a pressure for space, same as in China and a lot of countries across the globe. We're just urbanized a bit too much, and there's not enough space for traditional agriculture. So what I think is that a combination of models will be more present in the future, such as, for example, growing seedlings of tomatoes or peppers, chilies, salads, you name it, like all those crops that we can grow quite well and already do it well in hydroponics, like in Dutch greenhouses. But do those seedlings in vertical farms, maximize the efficiency and the success rate of the seedlings germination. Can also create a little bit of a harsher environment for these seedlings so that when they're transported into the greenhouse in a more pleasant environment, let's call it this way, or favorable environment, they can really thrive. And combining these technologies together makes sense where you have, for example, a lot of sun and not too cold winters where you still have some sun, which wouldn't really be the case here in Switzerland. But in other regions, like Mediterranean regions or stuff like this, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, I don't think there will be one technology that will win over the others, or one way of farming that will win over the other. And I don't think that that's the point that we're all making here today. It's just that, as Alex mentioned before, the success of our industry is, or the growth of our industry basically relies on how bad the climate is going to be in the future. And I'm a pretty big climate skeptic, or when it comes to how bad the climate is going to be, I think it's going to be really bad. We've passed the point of no return. So now it's how are we going to be able to adapt to this, and combining these technologies and working together, creating homogeneity in the space, collaborating with others is really important to the success of this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said. I definitely don't want, I'm not eager to see only indoor vertical farming products on the shelves. I'd like to see it take its place next to other options. Indeed, when you go in a supermarket today, you don't just see one type of leafy green or one option most of the time. Usually there's 4 or 5 different leafy green options. You might have an organic option, a couple of conventional options, and then depending on where you are, you may see greenhouse or vertical farming options too. So there's lots of room in the market for both to exist. I think Pierre also did a good job to note that the two can be complementary. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't highlight something that's sort of special about indoor farming, whether it's vertical or otherwise, which is that it's sometimes called CEA, or controlled environment agriculture. And that's almost self-explanatory. When you're indoors, you can control so many more conditions than you could ever in an outdoor environment. And by doing that, you effectively give yourself a laboratory environment where you control variables in the growing process. And that just advances understanding about plants, biology, plant science in general, by sort of having that controlled environment. And the learnings from that can certainly help outdoor or conventional growers as well. Part of our research edict here is not just to advance indoor growing, but to develop technologies for more efficient outdoor growing too. So I think that's something that I want to hit on as well, is that they can certainly be complementary.
I think that's sort of most of the views of the industry, and I think there's been a few questions regarding this. I would love to tackle the topic about like how efficient vertical farming is, at least right now, and particularly regarding costs and profit margins and everything like that. So I think that you guys can go more in detail into that, because I'm sure you know some figures that, I mean, I'm not a math person. I don't do numbers really well. I'm good at speaking, but that's pretty much it. That I do think that most people would agree that, particularly regarding profit margins and how expensive vertical farm produce can be, that at least not for the next decade minimum, there's not really going to be competition and more sort of vertical farming filling in the market, where traditional agriculture cannot reach. I don't know if anyone will challenge me on that. But I guess the floor is still yours now. That was just my point aside of that.
Maybe I wants to go. Okay. Maybe I think that the benchmarking ourselves to traditional agricultural prices doesn't really make sense. First, because traditional agriculture is heavily subsidized. We're not. So already on this, consumers have a benefit. Then the second point is that we also have a certain value that traditional agriculture doesn't bring. And we've mentioned it before, but there's also, I think, one point we haven't touched upon is the quality of the plant, because we consume a lot of energy, but not for nothing. We are able to create a perfect spring with the most ideal nutrients, lighting, CO2 even, or temperature conditions for plants to thrive. And this is known to improve the nutrient and vitamin content of a plant, giving it greater taste. So if we continue to benchmark ourselves against traditional agriculture, both in terms of the products and in terms of the prices, I think we are going to hit a wall, because we're never going to achieve these prices. Or maybe in a distant future where electricity and materials and labor doesn't cost anything and we can automate everything and not touch the product anymore. But that would also happen with traditional agriculture, with automated tractors and harvesting and stuff like this. So it's a bit of a race to the bottom if we look at it this way. But the profitability topic is, of course, very important. I think that we need to really demonstrate the value proposition that we have with, and I'm going to bring in again, a very difficult to do life cycle analysis. Like in every nascent industry, we didn't really care about costs for the past 20, 30 years, and now we have to control and lower them and become more efficient. And this is the race that is interesting to focus on. And then we also need to create standards of our own or within the industry. And this goes by building partnerships with industry players, being more transparent on disclosing information, and really allow ourselves to build a benchmarking system of our own. And then, improving the profitability by really trying to find efficiencies at every step of the production cycle as we grow. The good news, I think, is that we can make an interesting parallel with renewables or solar panels. I studied energy economics, and still, when I was in my master's, the average efficiency or conversion efficiency of a panel was about 15%. Now I see some panels with up to 40-45% conversion efficiency. Even solar panels developed by the MIT that can work at night by using thermal energy. So there's so much evolution in technology and innovation in that space that there's a good, it's a fertile ground for us to continue to evolve and innovate in this space.
That's very well put. Thank you so much, Pierre. We have about 5 minutes to go. So do you guys see any questions from the audience that you would like to answer? I think that Tom posed a really interesting one regarding what happens to the crops if there's a power supply issue. Is there like some sort of backup power? How do you guys work with that?
Yeah, I can answer. We always look when we're going to a new market at the reliability of the grid, if we're going to be on the grid. And we sort of use the data from the last 5 or 10 years about blackouts to dictate our decision about how much redundancy we should build in, whether or not we add generators for backup power. The plants can tolerate a certain amount of downtime from lights and watering and HVAC systems. So we look at the historical data and decide what the risk is, and then we use that to decide how much generation we want to have on tap.
I think that's a really interesting answer. Actually, I think this is the first question that I didn't know the answer to, so happy to hear that. Any other questions that you guys would like to answer? I think Hansel here asked about the cost margins, but we already discussed it. Martin has been talking about the efficiency of water supply, which we have also discussed. So unless someone has still some questions for us, I think this might be the end for us, sadly.
Maybe just really quickly, I really wanted to add something to the cost discussion, because
yes.
I really believe we're not that far away from being competitive in terms of price. So we've seen that, especially with herbs, for example, on European markets, it's not very difficult to be competitive, I would say. And also, I think there's also a maximum that people are willing to pay. We've seen that it's probably about 20% in the Netherlands, at least. 20% on top of benchmark prices. But I think the biggest element in being competitive on price level is your scale. So if you have a larger farm, it does a lot with your pricing. And I really think with certain crops that vertical farming can be definitely profitable, but also competitive. Of course, all dependent on market size, etc. So it depends on a lot of different things, but
I think that considering that lately,
No, fully agree with Ben on that one.
I was just going to say that considering that lately it feels like every single farm being built is the new largest vertical farm in the world, then we certainly are not far off. It's I think it's sort of funny that everyone's like, we're building the largest, not anymore. Oops. So happy to see that everything's scaling up. We need to wrap things up because we've been going for 49 minutes already, and I did promise you guys something a bit shorter. So thank you so much for coming here. It was lovely having you on. Do you guys want to leave us with a few words, or do you just want to say goodbye and we wave off?
Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you for showing up.
Yeah.
I'd add, if anyone watching is based in the US, Aeroforms just rolled out nationally with Whole Foods. So keep an eye out for Aeroforms greens in your local Whole Foods if you're in the US.
I wish I was in the US so I could try them, but I will try Yesai soon because I should be visiting Switzerland soon. So thank you so much to everyone in the audience for watching. Thank you so much, Pierre. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you so much, Alex, for showing up. Thank you to all of your respective companies for letting us host and just giving me an hour of your time. It was a pleasure. It's always great talking to you, and I'm sure we will catch up soon.
Anytime.
Thank you, Garazi.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bye,
guys.
Thank you, gentlemen.
everyone.
Bye bye.